Very excited today about our podcast for Deep Spirituality because we're going to be working on addressing and discussing a theme called Coming Home. And I did a talk on that a couple of days ago, and I have some people who actually were at a portion of or all of the talk. Today I'm joined by Dave Traver, Parker Allen, and Cameron Straw, and I think they probably represent the millennial, and do you guys represent the Z generation too?
Yeah, I think we're Z technically, yeah.
So we got millennial and we got Z generation sitting in here, and we're going to talk about relationship with God. One of the reasons we're going to talk about relationship with God is because I know for me, I started out in church, and that I was not a religious person, and so it took a lot for me to understand the system of religion, like going to church and reading the Bible, all the rules, and so it was hard for me to capture the God part, and so we're going to work real hard on doing that, and hopefully we'll make it fun. But to start out, I'm going to ask the guys a question, and I'm going to have them answer it. And maybe when you answer the question, you can just mention, I know, we're your student, or, I know that Cameron's working on a project, doing good. He's been doing that. Maybe mention that's what you're doing, but get right into it and just answer this question. A lot of people get up in the morning and have what's called a quiet time or a devotional. And I wanted to ask you guys the question, do you think there is a difference between a quiet time or devotional and having a relationship with God? So let's define a quiet time or devotional. You get up, you read the Bible. Some people read a spiritual book, say a prayer, various links. That's the quiet time or devotional. But then I'm wondering, do you think that's a relationship with God or not? And one of you guys can jump on in and tackle that one.
I don't think they're similar at all, actually. I think.
And who are you? Who are you?
Oh, I'm David. I'm a student at Santa Clara University.
There you go.
I'm going to be a senior there. Go
right.
Broncos. And no, it's funny because when you go around campus early in the morning, you'll see people walking around. Granted, not a lot. It's college, but you will see some people running in the morning. I mean, it's pretty peaceful for them, and it's a beautiful campus. But, some would argue they're having a quiet time. Like, it's quiet for them. It's peaceful. They're getting their day started. And you'll see them pretty routinely if you wake up at that time. And for me, a relationship with God, it's really easy to turn that into a to-do list, into a I need to do this type of thing. I'll wake up in the morning. I'm going to go crack open my Bible.
Why is that easy? Why do you say that's easy to do?
Because it's easy to get in this mindset of, here's what I need to do every day. It's the same type of routine.
Why would you need to do that?
Well, you don't have to, but it's easier if I'm going...
I'm saying, there's people out there who don't go to church.
Okay.
That are listening to our podcast.
Okay,
They're trying to figure out, do I want to go to church? Do I want to read the Bible? Do I want to know God? And they probably need to understand something about your context. Mm-hmm. In academia, they call it your situatedness.
Sure.
Meaning, who are you? Where do you come from? What are your biases? Did you grow up in the church?
Yes, I did.
That's your context.
Okay.
So I didn't grow up in the church.
I see. Okay.
I grew up way, way, way not in the church, and it took a lot to get me in, and we'll cover some of that one day. But so I think people want to understand, because I think you have a lot of cool ideas and insights, but what they need to know is, what is it like to grow up never knowing what it's like not being in church, and how does that affect your view of quiet time being a responsibility versus necessarily a relationship with God? Does that make sense?
It makes. Maybe when you guys can share, I'll think about that for a second.
I think I grew up religious. I'm Cameron. I grew up religious. I think America, everyone has a religious experience, but I think I grew up going to church, Catholic high school, private Lutheran school.
All right.
The whole thing. Memorize scripture for homework.
Ooh.
Yeah, that whole thing. And then
I never did that.
Then I rebelled against it a little bit in my teen years, but now I've been a Christian for about 10, 11 years, going to church again, and started out reading the Bible a lot, and that's what got me interested in God again. And then I think over the years it has become more of something I just do. I just read. I wake up, read the Bible, and I'll go and pray. And I think for me, I'm starting to discover more of a disconnect from me and God, where I can just read and think I'm doing good spiritually, or I guess I measure myself based on that sometimes, how much I know in the Bible or how much I know about what the Bible says, and instead of using that more as a gauge for myself spiritually, instead of really thinking like, how close am I to God? And it's not really based on that. So I think for me, I think there is a difference between, I forget the exact question you asked, but I think a relationship with God or walking with God and reading your Bible or having a quiet time in the morning. And I think there is a big difference that I'm seeing, because I think just being in church, I can be very routine. And when I say routine, I mean kind of getting to religious traditions around like, oh, I read my Bible and I'm a good Christian, quote unquote, but it's not based on any reality in my life or actionable or like a heart that's trying to do something different. Like maybe I could stay the same for a long time. And I think I have in different ways, and maybe deceive myself based on, oh, I'm reading my Bible or I know these scriptures. It's like taking it back to 7th grade, right? I know these scriptures, memorize these scriptures. And it's
pass
like,
that test.
Yeah, exactly. Pass the test. And so I think it can become a performance thing. And I think it is for me in a lot of ways.
I know you're somebody who, my experience working with you on Project Doing Good, which is a great site. Is that www.projectdoinggood.org?
Yes, .com.
www.projectdoinggood.com if you want to take a look at that, where Cameron's been done some really great work with some organizations on launching Doing Good. But it seems to me that you're a person who wants dynamism, movement, and inspiration.
Yeah.
And so if I listen to what you're saying, you're basic, and this is just an introduction to coming home. I'm going to explain more about what coming home is. It's really about coming home to God. And it sounds a little bit like that's what you did, is you were going to church before, and that was great in a sense that you were around religion and around Christianity, around faith. But the dynamism wasn't there, and the sort of that explosive experience of intimacy and even power with God to change and to grow wasn't there. Right.
Yeah. No one. People taught me stories, and that's what I thought they were, like good stories, and I'll learn that and teach that to my kids one day too, because But I didn't see it as something that I could apply to my life and something that really could change me, because it didn't, and I didn't see people around me changing either. So it was like, oh, okay, well. So
and it seems like, and I don't think any of us feel like, or I certainly don't feel like we want to put down any form of Christianity, or I think it's good to go to church. It's good to read the Bible. It's good to pray. But what we're trying to do is say, we know, or at least I know, I wouldn't have continued to go or be a part of church if my relationship with God had not kicked in. And so what you and I, Cameron, are talking about is, if you get the rules down, those rules were hard for me to get down. Boy, I'm telling you, I'll go into it more at some point. That's why I'm really curious to hear from Parker and David, because they've actually had the experience of being sort of born, and then that's where they've been on Sunday morning since the beginning. And I wonder, I guess what I'm asking both of you guys is, I wonder if sometimes for you it's hard to see the difference between the routines that Cameron described and the experience with God. It's kind of like, it's a difference between, a signed marriage or dating, right? When you're born, we're going to pick somebody out for you, and that's who you're going to marry, or I get to grow up and date who I want. And so I'm not, now technically, statistically, assigned marriages have done better in staying together than dating. So I'm not making an argument either way. I'm not putting anybody down in another culture. But what I'm saying is, for us, as most of us are just generally Americans, we look at dating as exciting. And we look at assigned as not. Assigned is a rule, and dating is an adventure to know someone from our point of view, culturally. So I'm wondering, can you guys give some insight to people? Maybe there's a parent of a teen out there. Maybe there's a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old who feels frustrated with church because they feel like there's a bunch of rules. I'm supposed to read my Bible. I'm supposed to pray. And they can't see the difference between that. Because I really do think there is a difference. My bias is showing between having a quiet time and actually building a relationship with God. Either one of you guys jump in on that?
Like Cameron grew up going to church, and I grew up, my parents would tell me to read a chapter of Psalms or have a quiet time, and in the morning, and it was always kind of just something I did, not really something I cared about, but just something to do. And then I spent a while in high school kind of rebelling against that and not really doing any of that.
What's a while? 10 minutes?
No, like,
10 minutes
like
or 2 years?
3 years.
Oh.
3.5 years. Yeah, so that's a while.
See, now you're in that's more my wavelength. A while. I spent 19 years in the while.
Yeah. But I think something I saw a lot of people kind kind of what you were saying, like the loss of dynamism. And I saw people have quiet times and have this supposed relationship with God, but no real change. And I was like, that's not, I don't want that. Like, I don't want, to just have to follow these rules with no outcome, like nothing good coming from it.
Sure.
So that was very unattractive to me. So I stopped doing that. I would still go to services and do stuff because I like some of the people there. But kind of the quiet time. Going back to the original question, the difference between a relationship with God and a quiet time is, I think, it's definitely important in a relationship with God to have a quiet time. But and I've seen myself now as I've tried to work on my relationship with God for the last, seriously, for the last year and a half or so, that I'm starting to get into this zone where I can have those quiet times where I like quiet times without a relationship with God, which is something I was very critical of, which I started to see myself. I'm like, no, that's not what I want.
Right.
But
how old are you?
I just turned 20 years
All
old.
right. So you said the last year and a half you've really been working on it.
Yeah, I think last year.
That's fine.
Last year.
So I think that's a great thing. And let me just say this. Coming home really comes from John 15. And we won't go over that scripture probably today because we have a lot we want to go over. If I get a chance, we'll go to it. But what you're describing, Parker, is what coming home is all about. That I think we got to be committed to all the things the Bible teaches with regard to, reading our Bible, praying every day, being in fellowship with people, trying to help people do good, reach out to people who are searching for God. I certainly am glad someone reached out to me.
Yeah.
But we can oftentimes think that the reason churches and communities of faith are not attractive is because of people not wanting to get up on a Sunday morning or the moral expectation. But I think you just described what, in my view, really does it. People don't see the dynamism.
Yeah.
You go to a Golden State Warriors basketball game, and I mean, you're positively transported, man.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. You go to a concert, and you watch any of the great performances. My favorite would probably be Bruce Springsteen today. And I'm sure Parker and David, you love Justin Bieber. You guys look like Bieber.
David's a huge Justin Bieber fan.
Yeah, I knew that. And Cameron probably likes some country guy. What's it, Blake Shelton? Probably Blake Shelton guy. I don't know. But when you go to these concerts, they're just positively incredible. I mean, what an experience! And you know what I think's amazing is you can get 100,000 people in the stadium in Barcelona for Bruce Springsteen. And he'll sing Hungry Heart, and every single person in English will be singing Hungry Heart with him. And I know some people will be critical of that and say, well, you're comparing apples to oranges. Church isn't like that. No, I don't think it's about is church like a concert. It's the dynamism. It's the movement. It's the inspiration. It's the emotion. And that, in my mind, comes from a personal relationship with God where you really get intimately connected to him. And I want to encourage people with what Parker just talked about. You said 20, right?
20, yeah.
He's 20 years old, but only in the last year, he's been around church for 20 years, and only in the last year has he really been able to dive in on his relationship with God and start to really see the difference that it can make when you have a personal relationship with God. So you're having a quiet time not to read your Bible and pray, but to get an intimate relationship with God. Think of reading your Bible as listening to God and praying as talking. In other words, it's a conversation. And one of the reasons I picked these three guys to be part of the podcast is each one of them has spent time with me, with my sons, walking. And we take these walks at least once or twice a week during vacations every day, twice a day. And when we walk, we talk about our lives. I'm significantly older. We talk about our lives, our struggles, our pains, our problems, our hopes, our dreams, and all of it is surrounding God. And I hope through the podcast we're beginning today, this series about coming home, that we can get everybody to come home like Parker just described, because that's what he described. It wasn't a matter of was Parker going to church. It was a matter of would Parker come home, not to you, to me, to the church, to the membership, to the rules, but would he come home to God? And in John 15, I grew up really falling in love with the RSV, which uses the word abide. The Voice translation uses the word abide. There's some people out there who don't like the Voice translation, have some prejudice against it. That's their deal. But I think that the Voice translation does a tremendous job of giving you the emotion of abide. Abide is a word that means dwell or to make your home there. And that's where the theme of this comes from. John 15, that many people say remain, and I get that. But what I think Jesus is saying is, I want you to make your home in me. This is your home. What is home? What does home mean to you, David? When you think of home, what does home mean to you? Just say what you think. This is
Yeah,
these guys are, a couple of these guys are learning about podcasts, so I'm surprising them. They don't see it coming for those out there. But that's the fun part. We're not experts yet. We're working on it. But just tell me the first thing comes to mind when you think of home.
I mean, home cooked meals.
Home cooked meals.
All
All right, Parker. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of home?
Warm.
Warm.
Yeah.
All right.
Relaxing.
Relaxing.
Like,
all right. How about safe, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Safe.
Definitely.
All right. How about when your parents are saying no or yes? It's a little discipline.
Yeah.
You think of that as home. You know,
Right.
you want to do something, you don't get to do it, right? How about identity? Did any of you think of home as identity?
That's good.
All right. So
yeah.
so when I was in school growing up, I went to high school in the 70s, late 70s. We used to call each other by our last name a lot. So you didn't call the person by their first name, you call them by their last name.
Yeah, I see.
You know, and your surname, as the Europeans would say. All right, you call by last name. What is that doing? That's saying that's your identity. So I was known as Ewell. I had older sisters, and so that was part of my identity, right? My home, I lived on a street in Kentwood, Michigan, and the neighborhood I lived in Kentwood was part of my identity. I hung out with Dirk and Scott
Right.
and these guys, and I was primarily around athletes. And in the latter part of my years in high school or in all of high school and around, I was a little nerdier in my middle school years, and I had an identity, right? And so I think home is about your identity. It's how you feel secure in life. You know where you go. I told a story in my talk the other night about a little boy. It's one of my favorite stories. I read it in a book years and years ago. And this little boy moved to a neighborhood. His family moved to a new neighborhood, and they were in this new neighborhood, got in a new house, and he had a bike, jumped on his bike, and he wanted to go look around the neighborhood. So he went for a ride around the neighborhood, and I remember doing this in Kansas when I was growing up. We moved to a new neighborhood on Gentry Street, and I went for a ride with my bike, and I really used to enjoy riding my bike. I had a little Mattel bike. It was a motorbike. They had an advertisement for a bike that was like a motorcycle, but it didn't have an engine, but it had pipes and all that, and you rode the bike, and it was a Mattel bike. And they had it on the beach riding the sand. I really wanted that bike for Christmas, and my parents ended up getting it from me, but they didn't show me till the very end, right? And so I was there for Christmas. We opened up our gifts, and my parents were like, "Everybody happy?" And I had this sad look on my face. And they said, "Oh, wait a minute, we forgot one." And my dad goes in their bedroom and pulls and rolls out the bike, but it's wrapped up top. And I open it up, and it's my Mattel bike, and that's the bike I learned to ride a bike on. So anyway, I'm riding that bike around the neighborhood, just like this kid. This kid's riding around the neighborhood, right? And so he's really excited. He's enjoying himself. He's having a really great time. And then all of a sudden he realizes I don't know where I'm at. Kid's about 8, 9 years old. And that's actually the age I was in Kansas when I was riding my Mattel bike, 8, 9 years old, or 7 years old. And so he gets lost and he doesn't know where I'm at. So he walks up to a house, and this is, in the years where you not every kid was getting kidnapped or threatened on the street. So it's a different time, different age. He knocks on the door of the house, and he says to the person who answers the door, he says, "Hey, I'm lost. Can you help me? I'm lost." And they say, "Well, do you have anything? Do you know your address?" "No." "Do you know a phone number?" "No." What's your parents' name?" He said, "Grandma." And I remember when I heard that for the first time, I was a little emotionally moved when I heard that, grandma, because you think of single parent kids whose parents are either gone, died, or something, imprisoned or something like that. And you think a little bit of urban life and how great grandmas can be. And then the person talking to him said, "Well, I don't know what to do." So they went and called the police. The police come up. And the police are quizzing him. "Okay, which direction did you come from? What do you remember? Do you remember any landmarks?" And he goes, "Oh, I remember a landmark. I remember something." And they said, "What is it?" He goes, "Near my house, there's this church building with this really, really huge cross. And if I can find my way back to that cross, I can find my way home." And to me, that's what coming home is. I think just following the rules isn't coming home. Coming home is being moved emotionally by God and saying, "I want that relationship." And so if there's one word that probably describes home, I think we all would agree, it's relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if and some people say, "My home was terrible." Yeah, but I'll bet you when you watch a great television or movie series on family, you really want that. Everybody wants home. And that's why we're going to talk about coming home. And so in this first part of this series, what we're trying to do, and we're just going to do a section. This is sort of section one, like an introduction to it. we're trying to get everybody in the mindset that to have a true relationship with God is to come home. It's to find that cross. It's to find that connection to God, to find that gratitude and that emotion. And I would say that a great way to look at it is in Luke 10:38 to 42. And I want to read you a passage in Luke 10:38 to 42. And I want you to just listen for a minute. And then I'm going to get you guys' thoughts on this, because I was going over this and I thought it was a perfect way to describe coming home. I'm reading out of the Passion Translation. And the funny thing about translations, a lot of people pick their translation. When I was first a Christian, I'd go into a Christian bookstore and they would be like, okay, the only Bible you read is the King James Version. Now some people are that way about the NIV or the New King James Version. I read them all. And so I believe that we can sometimes get insight from translations that maybe aren't word for word, etc. It's when we combine all the translations that we really gain something. I'll say another thing about translations, because I think that could be an issue as we use different translations. I used to like reading Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, all the Russian literature. And what's funny is you would have people say, well, I prefer this translation of the Brothers Karamazov as opposed to that translation. But you never heard anybody say, this translation over here is invalid. Translation of languages is translation of languages. And I fully believe that an academic down at Stanford who doesn't even believe in God, who knows Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, can translate the Bible accurately. I do. And people say, well, he might not. He might, I mean, not, but more than likely he would, because he doesn't even care. He'll just go, yeah, that's what it says. And so I think we got to be a little careful about condemning or exalting any particular translation and think of them all as just like great literature. Read a lot of people's translations and you'll probably get a lot closer to both the accuracy, but also you don't just want to be accurate intellectually, you want to be accurate emotionally. And I think the Passion Translation, I think, does a good job of trying to be accurate emotionally. So Luke 10:38, talking about coming home. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their journey, they came to a village where a woman welcomed Jesus into her home. Her home. Now, when you think about your own home or your apartment, you know what you think about, I think, is control. This is my home. I decide who comes in, goes. I decide what's cooked and when. That's my control spot. I think Martha, that was her control spot. Bring Jesus to her home. I got this. And a lot of times when we're seeking control, that's home. Home isn't a house, it's control. Home isn't a house, it's my career, it's my major, it's the grade. I've got to have this level grade or I'm not going to be secure and content. And I think Martha was in her home. And so I think she's in her home. Jesus wants to get her into his home. He wants to bring her home. Her name was Martha, and she had a sister named Mary. Listen to this. This is great in the Passion Translation. Mary sat down attentively before the master, absorbing every revelation he shared. I'm going to read that again. Mary sat down attentively before the master, absorbing every revelation he shared. Absorbing and attention. I think a lot of great relationship with God is not just reading the Bible, but it's giving God your attention. It's not hearing anything else that's going on. It's not looking up and watching a TV. It's not longing for a second bagel. You're so wrapped up and you're so absorbed and your attention's 100% focused on him. And Mary was 100% focused. She immediately made her home Jesus. Now, of course, Martha's the one who owned the home. So it was a little easier for Mary. But Mary was like, I don't care what else is going on. I'm into this dude. This dude is bringing it. Verse 40. But Martha became exasperated by finishing the numerous household chores in preparation for her guests. So she interrupted Jesus and said, Lord, don't you think it's unfair that my sister left me to do all the work by myself? You should tell her to get up and help me. You know what's interesting here, I think, is that she immediately thinks life is unfair because Mary's 100% focused on Jesus and she isn't. I think a lot of times when you don't come home to God, you end up bitter at the people who do. You end up mad that this guy's getting all the attention. Verse 41, the Lord answered to Martha, my beloved Martha, and I love this. Why? That's a big time question. Why are you upset and troubled, pulled away by all these many distractions? Are they really that important? Mary has discovered the one thing most important, by choosing to sit at my feet. She is undistracted, and I won't take this privilege from her. You know, I think a lot of the time we allow achievement, significant status, respect, feeling valued, getting attention to replace home, which is with God. And so a lot of what we want to do in this podcast is work ourselves to get there and encourage all of you to get there, to come home. What do you think about Martha and Mary, guys?
I mean, that's a great scripture and a great translation. I think I can definitely be a Martha. It just made me think about how I have expectations and for things to be a certain way, or even becoming a Christian, like, oh, now my life's going to be great in all these ways. I'm going to have, this work out for me. I'm going to accomplish these dreams.
Right.
And I get distracted. I think even you were mentioning Project Doing Good. It's this great organization, and we help people do good, and we highlight doing good stories.
Right.
That's all good. But without, I think I still can get caught up in doing something and miss that it's really what I really need is a relationship with God. Everything that I need, but like he said, I think in the other translation it says one thing is needed, or the most important thing is, choosing to have that relationship with God and believing that that's enough. And I'm an anxious person that can run around and feel like these things need to be this certain way. And I think it's funny because I'm a blamer too, where I'll blame people, but I haven't really made the connection until right now, maybe with just seeing that when I'm not walking with God in that way, or not understanding the most important thing, I'm like mad at all these other people or circumstances.
And isn't it cool how it says in the scripture that Mary interrupted Jesus and she goes, "Isn't this unfair?" I've been there too. I've been there too, where I'm like, "Hey, wait a minute." And you know what I think when she says life is unfair at that moment, she's reflecting for all of us. We get bitter when we don't focus on God and we focus on people. She was focused on Mary. She wasn't focused on God. So you get bitter, you get hateful, you get envious, you get jealous, and you get into all kinds of relationship sin when your focus is on the individual. And I think that's what you're saying.
No, completely. Because I guess I'm hearing you, if I'm not focused on God, I am just automatically focused on people. And that's just how it's going to be, I think. Because
sweet insight.
I think I know for me, I make people that God, for instance, or I'm expecting, or even expecting things of God, or because it's interesting when you look at a story like this and you see Martha telling Jesus it's unfair, and you can almost look down on her, how could she say that to Jesus? But we do that to God all the time. I know I do. I just think my life's unfair. Why aren't things working out? Like I said, the way I wanted to, why aren't my dreams coming true by 30 the way that I had planned, or that you promise or something. And it's really
they can't see you do the quotes in the
quotes,
air. That was good. That was good. The quotes in the air were good.
Yeah, it's not, and
the timing was impeccable when you did it.
His promise was not for me to, have the picket fence by 30. That was never, I didn't read that in scripture, but I think I can put that kind of stuff on God when my focus is really on myself or on other people, or my expectations for the way things should go.
I love what you're talking about, because I think that, there are going to be some people who are going to be like, no, that's not my problem. I don't focus on people. No. You know what? Okay. Fine. I know I do.
Right.
That's all I can speak for. I do, and I did, and I'll talk more about it. But what I love about what you're talking about is you're really elevating the conversation to say, when you're feeling life is unfair, sometimes part of that is you're comparing yourself to someone else, or you're comparing it to the timing of when you want certain things to happen. I want to be, this much money by 25, this much money by 28, this many kids by 32, and we have this whole structure laid out. Yeah. And I think Martha walked into that house, and she's like, I think Martha was, to own a house as a woman in that time was a big deal, right?
Right.
And so I think she was in there going, I'm going to showcase my skills, man. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to put, and Jesus was like, hey, thanks for inviting me over, but I got some stuff to teach. And so part of it is she's not getting the attention that she expected to get. And sometimes I think we think it's unfair that we don't get the attention, that we're not in. I know I speak for myself.
Right.
I always thought, hey, I should be the center of attention. And if I'm not, then I've got to work to get it, or something's wrong with this organization, right? And I think that a lot of people don't see how bitter we can become. I know I've become, especially when I was younger, bitter that I'm not first, bitter that I don't get the attention. Right. I think we can get hateful of other people because we put all of our trust in that person, and then maybe they don't give us the attention we want, and we get really hateful and bitter toward them. I even think a lot of what's going on in the world, people go, how are we going to get less chaotic and people not hating people? Well, they're going to have to love something more than they love to hate. Right. And I think when you love God more than you love to hate, you do a lot better. Parker, you look like you're meditating over there on some deep Tolstoyan thought about faith.
I was just thinking for myself, like with, I don't know, it's like in the first part about like Mary decided to sit down and Martha decided to just go do the chores and stuff. But with my roommates, I live with David at Santa Clara, and there's been a couple times when like we have school stuff come up or different stuff we have to study for, and there's obviously this like there's a stress to want to do that, but then this other thing comes up with like one of our like relationship with God or relationship with someone else that we needs addressing. Mm-hmm. And there's this like thing you have to decide, hey, do we work on this, or I'll just do that next week after my final or project is done or whatever.
Right.
And I think it's so easy. I was just thinking for me with other people, like there was one time when this happened with David, and I was like, no, we got to go out and like go out and pray.
That.
And like,
oh my gosh.
And we went out, and he had some stuff to do, but we went out for like, I don't even remember, a couple hours or something, and doing that. And that was really good. But then when I think for me, when I'm going through this, I'm like, there's no way I'm doing anything but school right now. And just that like,
do you think a lot of kids can sometimes get into I shouldn't say a lot of kids, do you think that students can get into the mode where when they're trying to avoid the emotions of life, which God is trying to lead? Because I think God tries to lead us into things. So I think when he allows some, I don't know what you're talking about exactly, but when he allows some conflict to occur with you and David, I don't think he is like always angry at us that we've done something wrong. I think he takes situations and tries to bring people together. Mm-hmm. I think he looks and says, I want Parker and David to be best friends, and I'm going to create something, or I shouldn't say create, I'm going to allow something to happen that forces them to decide, because that's what happened with Samson and in war. He was brought to a point, he was brought into conflict to achieve God's purposes. So sometimes conflicts are normal. I don't think God's up there going, I'm going to make a conflict. Yeah. But I think they're normal, but he can use those. Do you think a lot of students miss out on relationship with God and people because they hide behind homework and busyness and activity?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is David again. And I mean, there were so many thoughts from this passage. I was trying to figure out what exactly to say, but I think what you're saying right now is really good. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I'm someone who's super task-oriented. I'll always have a checklist going. I'm always paying money for these productivity apps on like the App Store.
Pre-med, by the way, people. There's a pre-med.
I'm always trying to figure out how to get more done in the same amount of time, right?
I think all A's last semester.
No, that's definitely not true.
Well, the semester before that it was.
Not really. Yeah. But anyways, that's a different time. Anyways, but
close, believe me.
It was funny because when I remember when Parker moved in and when we started living together, I really wanted to, be really good friends with him, but I wasn't really sure how to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought we're going to go to like the theme park near our place. We're going to do some like crazy like hike, and that's going to bring us together. I didn't suspect in the world that it would be in the middle of finals week. We're going to get in this argument, or there's going to be this thing that comes up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to slow down and either choose to, like Parker said, take on this spiritual endeavor or focus on the book work, right? In the library with school.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what you said earlier that really stuck out was, well, to answer your question first, yes, I do think in general, students, at least at our school, at our university, it's really easy to get swept up in the speed of things. And even people who come up from out of state, I have friends from, the Midwest or even the East Coast, and they say the speed of life here is one of the first things they notice that's just really different from where they're from.
Right.
And they say, yeah, it's a stereotype, and it's true of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. You guys are really fast. And I guess I definitely support that, I guess we'll say stereotype. But something you said earlier that was really good was that home, or that people associate with home, we can all agree with is safe, right? And I think everyone wants that feeling of being safe, of being secure. Yeah. And I think you said like Martha wanted it, and she did it by having control, right? I think I do it a lot of times by trying to get control of my schedule, by doing more, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think I'm trying to figure out where to go with this, but I think the simple idea I had was that I can, for myself, right, growing up in the church, it can become about rules a lot, about tradition, about, you asked earlier, what's the difference between a quiet time, if there is one, between a quiet time and a relationship with God.
Yeah.
I can get into all the behavior, right?
Yeah.
And that's why even by answering the question earlier, it was really hard for me to not think about the behavior because I've grown up thinking about behavior. But really what everyone wants, including me, is that feeling of being safe. And people go to different things for that. And that's why the Barcelona concert, people will learn something in English if they don't speak it because they want to feel safe. And that's an environment people will pay a lot of money to feel safe, right? And I think that's what when I have a friend who doesn't even believe in God, and or a neighbor who doesn't believe in God, at least I can talk about that feeling of wanting to be safe or relationships. And that's commonly how I think a lot of us see safety is relationships, whether it's family or other peer relationships. But I think that's what's made God real for me, even though it wasn't always that way.
Right.
Was realizing I really want to feel safe. I really want that security. And even though it's easy for me to be like Martha, where I want to speed up and I want to take control, and even go to school or other distractions, I think one of the hugest things for me to just admit is just to stop and say I really want to feel safe, and I'm going to all these different things to try and get it, but it's not really fulfilling that.
Profound. Seriously, that was awesome. You're getting your groove on podcast.
Good job, David.
It's hard to relax in front of the mic.
It is.
Let me tell you what I think was profound. You said something, I think I said it, but it doesn't mean anything when I say it. It means more when you say it. It's easy to get caught up in all the rules. And you emphasize safe more than even I did. And I think the safest place in life is not in a physical home, but it's in a relationship home. And what you talked about really is how do we get past the rules to get the relationship, and what does God want from us? Does God want performance, or does God want a relationship? And so I think this hopefully will serve as sort of a part one introduction to what we're trying to do. I wanted to make it a conversation because I think just listening to someone talk for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and I talked for a while, but it's not going to help. What helps is when you can hear a lot of different views, and we got a lot of different views in here. All four of us are different type of people. But I'm gonna say on our next section, we'll come back in a minute. We don't have any advertisers right now, but if we did have an advertiser, it would probably be that Bulletproof bar that I'm about to eat for my lunch. Bulletproof, the bar that I'm about to eat for my lunch. And so if Bulletproof ever discovers us, they can go give us more bars. But we're going to take a break for a minute, and we're going to come back. And based on what David said, who just dropped his phone, we're going to talk about, we're going to segue into coming home, and I'm going to talk a little bit, if Cameron and Parker and David will remind me, about a term my wife gave me to describe the early part of my Christian life: extreme behavior modification. We'll be back in a moment.